Good morning. We're holding a budget committee special meeting this morning. It's Monday, October 21st. And the first item on our special meeting of the agenda was discussion and approval of budget guidelines for the fiscal year 26. Since the agenda was posted, we have talked together in a collegial manner. Our colleagues have submitted their own version of, or their version of budget guidelines and an estimate budget, and we agreed that none of us would be talking about these this morning.
Well, I didn't.
So, I'm sorry, Leslie did say you would agree.
Well, Leslie doesn't.
And so that is our agenda item.
So wait a
So
second.
we'll move on to approval of BET budget.
I'm sorry, Leslie, you can't silence David. He's permitted to talk as a member of this committee.
Right. I think the meeting was called to discuss the guidelines, and there's been a lot of dialogue between you and Leslie Moriarty, which I'm aware of. I think it's been a good dialogue, Leslie, between you and Leslie Moriarty, and I commend you.
Collegial.
Collegial, oh, yes. I know, I agree. It has been a collegial dialogue between you and Leslie Moriarty, which is commendable. And I think that there are a few issues, not that insurmountable, not that would benefit from a little discussion. Not in the interest of trying to tarnish the collegiality, trust me, because that's so important, and I commend you and genuinely respect that. But I thought since we're here today, there would be some benefit in sort of at least, not in a confrontational way, but just to sort of say, okay, where are the differences and maybe what kind of roadmap we might consider to addressing the differences. They're not many. That's what I wanted to say. In a spirit of real, genuine collegiality, just to try to get this thing moving forward. I hope that's okay.
So, what we did talk about was not doing that. Quite frankly, I don't even have any notes with me. I don't even have any versions. So.
We don't need notes.
And so I think that if you want to proceed in the manner that we discussed, I think it's probably better that we do that as discussed. But, then we will still talk about these things, but at this point in time, I think we thought it would be better to just move this forward.
Well, yeah, but I'm a member of the committee, and I'm suggesting, since we're convened, the four of us are here, that wouldn't it, and we have our staff here, why waste the opportunity to try to see what the issues are, and if we can get somewhere, fine. If we can't, that's fine.
No, I don't think we're going to be talking about the issues and negotiations in the meeting today. And that's, what we've discussed.
Well, I'm troubled. You may not want to talk about the issues, but as a member of the committee, I'm gonna recite the issues. The meeting is called to order. I'm not a potted plant. I'm a member of the committee. I'm respectful of whatever discussions you may have had in a back room, but these meetings are in the public and they should benefit from discussion. We're here.
Right, and so I'll call in Harry now.
Yeah, I take offense at the term back room, and I don't want the public to misunderstand that. That implies collusion between Republicans and Democrats. This has been, as we've been saying, a collegial discussion between the chair of the budget committee and the head of the Democratic caucus. And Ms. Tarkenton's been consulting with me along the way. I'm sorry it appears that you weren't consulted about not discussing this morning, but that was fully my expectation. So I think three of us were expecting to walk into this meeting, notify the public that we were not going to be discussing this in public, not negotiating in public. I'm not finished. and that we would just be approving the minutes.
Well, you can discuss whether you want to, you don't like the word back room, it's a back room. We have a public meeting, the agenda is posted, the agenda says we're here to discuss the budget guidelines. I come, and you're saying, we're not going to discuss the budget guidelines.
Can I,
Back room implies something nefarious.
No, it just says what it
Yes,
is.
it does.
Well, to you it
Take
does.
offense.
Well, take your offense, I don't
The
care.
public would be offended.
Well, I'm offended. Damn it, I'm offended. I come to the meeting, it's a public meeting, and and you say I can't talk.
So
I'm
we'll
not
call
saying you
him-
can't talk, your leader says you should talk.
No.
So, I'm sorry, I'll call him Leslie.
yeah, no, I just want to interject. I mean, the process that we've gone through is similar to what's been happening in prior years, in that two members of this committee try to get to talk about the issues, get the input of finance staff, and try to get to a document that we can agree on. Clearly, as evidenced from last week, there are still issues to be discussed. So looking for them, so there hasn't been back room, but it's been following the process. But we're at a point now where there are still issues outstanding that need to be resolved. I think some of them, and we're not gonna resolve them today, but I think there's some questions about the assumptions that went into the financials, which our staff does have input into. And I said, so for background, for understanding where the numbers are that we talked about at last week's meeting, or that were presented, I think we can have a little bit of that discussion today in the meeting, because all four members really need to hear it. So it's more efficient for our staff not to talk to four individual members, but things like tell us more about the inflation rate used here, or some of the other assumptions.
So we did talk about those things in our last week's meeting, the full budget committee meeting, the regular monthly meeting. And I think that you then submitted some comments. We had a discussion yesterday. As you point out, we have in the past. We've worked well together, and we plan to have additional discussions. We talked about you and I meeting with Roland after this meeting to talk about some of these issues. Quite frankly, I don't want to put them on the spot. And quite frankly, I don't even have my notes, because I thought you know what, we had a discussion. And I asked you if David would agree, and you said yes. So I'm disappointed that David doesn't have the confidence in you to basically support you in what you agree.
Okay, let's do something else. Let's not get.
Okay, so I agree with you. So I finished, we'll close the subject, and do I have a motion?
No.
You can't do that.
You can't just
I'm
close the
sorry.
subject. Let me roll it back so that we bring down the stress on this, because it's not my intention to do that. And I regret back room and causing any, let's just tone it down. There are three issues that I'm aware of that we have a little disagreement on. One is Nathaniel Witherall, one is the capital model, the other is the benefits issue, and I think the fourth issue is the risk fund. I don't have my notes, but I remember it because we discussed it. And these are not complicated issues, they're not. I don't expect, I'm not trying to come to an agreement today. That's not, I'm not trying to put any pressure on us. But isn't there benefit in discussing these issues in the open and seeing what they amount to, and whether there can be in particular, on the capital tax levy, we have a cliff in the year fiscal year 30.
We already heard about that point. You made that point at our
Ad
meeting last
infinitum.
Wednesday.
I know, and it's one of the issues that has to be resolved. And so we have our staff, we have our budget director, we have our controller. I didn't create the capital model, they did. And at some point, we have to discuss, some point, you want to wait like last year and do it in the throes of the budget discussion in February, after the departments have met? Can't we discuss it now? There are various options to consider as it relates to a cliff. It's in the public documents that have been submitted for years now. It's not a crisis, it needs to be looked at and addressed. And I don't know when we're gonna discuss it, it keeps getting postponed, and for heaven's sakes, the Budget Committee should discuss that issue. The issue of Nathaniel Witherall and the other issues as well. When do they get discussed in the open?
They will get discussed in the open.
When? When?
We'll have another meeting to discuss it.
When will it, all right, when will the meeting be and,
But we aren't at that point yet. We decided that this.
who's we? I didn't decide anything. Who's we? When are we gonna discuss it? We're now in the end of October. It's maddening. It's just maddening. It's not functioning, Leslie. It's not, you're the leader of the Budget Committee. When are we gonna discuss these issues, for heaven's sakes? Simple.
They will be discussed. So thank you for your comments. Appreciate your comments. I don't think this is the meeting to put Roland and Pete on the stand. That was not the intent of this meeting.
Roland and Pete are perfectly capable of being, they're not on the stand. They are, Roland and Pete can speak for themselves. And no one is putting anybody on the stand. We're just having, it's nonsense.
For the benefit of the public, I just want to state that they're in the Democrats' proposal that was given to us yesterday. There's a lot more than the issues that Mr. Weisbrod raised. They are proposing higher increases in 200 to 800 accounts, where we propose 2.75. They're, a higher capital tax levy, a contribution to Nathaniel Witherall. All of these add up to a proposed tax rate that is an increase of 5.45%. The Republican proposal that we put forward last week had an increase of taxes of 3.95%. So I want the public to be clear that what the Democrats are advocating here is a much higher tax rate.
Okay, so
No,
now, well, wait a second here.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
So now we can discuss it, that's
No,
great.
I'm
Because
sorry.
Harry is right. The guidelines which he's referring to, include, and what we have, what is in the draft guidelines is a reflection of the current budgeting trends that we're seeing. In other words, we have a 3% contractual obligation because of labor negotiations, labor contracts. Let me back up. What we're trying to say here is, what are the contractual obligations that the town is facing? Do we want to see a 6% increase? No. That's why we can come to an agreement. We agree you can't have a 6% increase in our mill rate. It's too high. But to ignore the contractual elements that exist, to ignore the headwinds that Nathaniel Witherall has presented, to ignore the capital needs as a result of appropriations already made, is a fool's errand. There is work to be done where we could work together to make reductions so that we can bring our mill rate down to the level that we all think makes sense. So we agree that 6% increase in the mill rate is untenable. We don't disagree with that at all.
Nobody's put that on the table.
Well, you just said.
I'm sorry, this was a discussion that was agreed that we wouldn't, we would just open it up and bring it to closure. I think this is very unfortunate. Leslie, you said you had more comments?
I had a comment because I have to respond to what Harry indicated, because it highlights a specific problem we have had with the guidelines now over the past couple of years. The guidelines, in my opinion, and that's what's included in the things that we've been talking about with you, is that the guidelines are a snapshot of the issues of what we see today. We expect that over the next 5 months till we get to the final of a budget process, assumptions change, right? But the guidelines should call out what we're seeing today, and the bottom line, the fact that the bottom line mill rate, which is not what I think the guideline should be managing to, the guideline should show where we are today and identifying the issues, because we may or may not, we don't want that bottom line guideline. I'm not sure you want the 4% guideline that's in your number, right? But the guidelines, and the wording of the guideline, even as proposed by Ms. Tarkington, which was not published, and talks about this being a snapshot. It's based on what we know now, not what we expect to approve, all right? There's a difference of opinion. If the guidelines are intended to be a cap on what is to be approved, then we gotta start over and we'll have a different conversation. But, so there's a fundamental, and we can talk about that, that's not talking about numbers, but what do we view as the purpose of the guidelines in the departments crafting their budgets?
So I'm disappointed, Leslie, that even, we had an understanding and we worked in a collegial manner, and it's my understanding, and I'm disappointed, but that.
There's a question on the table.
So, I do think that, the other thing that happens is a lot of guidelines, in my opinion, are starting a month too early in many ways, because a lot of the information we're getting, we keep hearing we'll have better information in November. It doesn't make any difference whether it's utilities or whether it's our revenues from our property taxes, because there's a change in the way our state government is going to handle motor vehicles. There's really quite a few things here. But the guidelines should be guidelines, and quite frankly, if you look at the last paragraph of what I gave to the BET, it does have a couple of even added section to basically say that, things change, etc. So, I'm sorry, I did not come prepared for this discussion, because that was not the intent of what we had agreed to last night.
Let's see if we can do one other thing while we have our staff here.
Excuse me, I'm the chair. And so, you could speak to me rather than to.
I am speaking to you, I'm speaking to you.
Well, no, I saw you speaking that way.
No, I look that way because I'm mentioning them, but I'm talking to you. Thank you for smiling. Thank you for smiling. No, that's.
No, this is supposed to be collegial, that was what we agreed to.
No, and let's keep it collegial, that's important. It is, I'm very much in that vein. The way I see the guidelines, Leslie, is it's conservative budgeting. In other words, if you look back at the guidelines from years past, which we actually were sent guidelines, some of them show 16% increases, right? But of course, nobody ever improves 16% increases. It just addressed all of the headwinds that the town is going to be faced with, so that as we go into the budget process, we can address them. And so this year, we're fortunate, it's not 16, we have a pretty good scenario. It's not 16%, it's 6, because we have headwinds from Witherall, things we've already discussed. So the question is, how do we address those? For example, you've been talking about open appropriation, open capital,
Correct.
Very correctly so. And we need to come to, in the budget season, we need to button down all the open capital. I completely agree with you. In order to get a handle on the capital plan going forward. You've been saying that, and I agree with that. You've been saying that for several years, right?
Right.
Right. So, but the problem is, we have not you, I'm not blaming anything or anybody, but we as a body have not succeeded in achieving that. But what happens is, until we do, we really don't have as good a picture of the capital plan as we don't have an accurate picture. So one of the things to discuss here is to say, okay, for example, let's say that we really put our shoulders to the wheel, 4 of us, and through our wonderful staff, got the departments to fix it this year, what you've been talking about. and we work together to fix the open capital. That plus a candid look at what I keep saying, the cliff in fiscal year 30, maybe the cliff goes away, maybe the cliff doesn't go away, but we need to look at that and we need to address that, and I think the language in the guidelines talks about that.
It does.
Correct, so we agree on that. But at the same time, I fear that even if we do address that, we still, because of appropriations already made, we're gonna have a problem in fiscal year 30 that we have to deal with it. We can't wish it away. And I don't know when we don't come to grips with these discussions. They just slip away and we don't do it.
Well, I agree with the slipping away, because I want to just go beyond open capital. I mean, I think this year we said we were going to start going through every project. And maybe we rather, I think November is going to be a very busy meeting for this budget committee, because we have a lot of items that have just been moved out. Nathaniel Witherall didn't have, their numbers ready yet, their first quarter numbers, so, that seems to move from September to October. Now we're talking November, and we can talk about some of the other things that have sort of, not because of the budget committee, but because of our departments. But maybe we need to begin, one of my other hot buttons has also been the grants. I think we need
I agree with
much better handle on that, and so maybe, rather than waiting to the budget cycle, because then it only, we start doing some of these things and ask them to come to our December meeting. The critical areas where we have some of these, issues, and start going through this information with them, not waiting to the budget cycle, but, I picked December just because December and January, we can say. I think November's gonna be busy, but, start getting, better data early, so that way, when we model or whatever, the information is more current and better data. I mean, one of the things that's happening here, with your cliff, is that our borrowings aren't really increasing yet, so, we need a much more realistic view of the timing, and with due respect, and it's not.
The bands are
finances-
increasing.
What?
The bands are increasing, it's just they haven't gotten to the bond period yet.
Right, we think that they're going to be spending money, but they aren't. And then the other thing that we're not doing is, I go back to, and I already said it, so I'm beginning to repeat myself the way you sometimes repeat yourself. But we have to, really, I mean, I'm not gonna repeat myself. So I just think that, there are some things here to do, and I agree with you. There's a lot more work to do. And, quite frankly, I'm gonna make another comment, because, I've certainly made this comment to my friends in my caucus, okay? And this isn't meant to be a political, is that we really need to take a more, not we, but, a more active role in our committees, okay? Too much, in my opinion, is coming back to the BET budget committee that probably should be addressed within the committees, and they should be starting much earlier in the process.
So,
And so, I find that, HR, if they're gonna look at staffing or whatever, they need to be working on that today in, feeding that information, beginning the cycle. That's actually what used to happen. You talk about, let's go back to the past. Well, that's something that used to happen.
No.
Things were starting earlier in the committees. And by the way, at the beginning of the budget cycle, the committees were actually, submitting written reports on staffing and, where we're gonna be, or on the, any changes in the budget resolutions, whatever, already to just, submit and talk about the issues in terms of legal settlements that would then, be crystallized in terms of our contributions to the risk fund. To me, those things rest in our committees. They don't rest with us.
So let me ask a question, if I could, to Pete and Roland. The issue that Leslie raises, fairly, truly, about open capital and grants, right? Don't look at me like that, Pete. to what extent can we wrestle that to the ground this year? In other words, some of it, no disrespect, does fall on the finance department as well. We have a lot, she's right, we have a lot of open capital. And we do need to sort of nail that better. How do you see that unfolding so that it helps us get through the impasse that we have now? Do you have any thoughts,
Well, the departments have historically not wanted to give up money, but they want to give it back.
I understand.
And that's very difficult to get them to close it out, because, you hear, this is gonna happen, we're going to go out to bid, waiting for this and waiting for that, and it's very difficult to get them to close it out.
Right, but we need them to close,
Yeah.
or at least, give a projection that you guys can endorse that reflects our best sense of where we're headed. Because it's mounting year by, Leslie has a good point. I agree with her on that point. But whether they close it out or whether we have a better grip on that, one way or the other, we'll need that as a tool to get us through the budget on the capital front. Do you agree? I mean, I agree with Leslie. And so we throw our hands up and we say, well, the departments are not willing to, quote, give it back. They don't have to necessarily give it back, but at least we should get your imprimatur on this is a good reflection within a range of what those open capital funding, what that open capital funding will actually be. Is that achievable this year? Because if it isn't, it's like Groundhog Day. We'll just be doing this, until my grandchildren are on the BET. I mean, we can't, it doesn't work, right?
So I think we all work, I don't wanna, we work with Roland and Pete, we work with you, we work with everyone to do what we can to accelerate some of these processes. I think they need to be done. But I would just say, Leslie has been working very hard in terms of the closeouts. But perhaps not, it hasn't been as successful as Leslie would like, because I don't want to put words in her mouth, but
And there are ways that we can improve it. We have a new town administrator, we can work more collaboratively and together to address this, because it affects the departments. They should want to provide this information, and I think, there's an opportunity there.
So, I agree with all of that. But I would just like to make one comment, just so that what has concerned me about these closeouts is that they then go off the radar screen. And we need a better process, and I thought that was going to be created through our audit committee process for the grants. Should we be closing out our appropriations before the grant that we had to approve that appropriation has been reimbursed to the town, or at least until we have a good tracking system for it, a process so that they're linked.
Can I ask,
so-
through you, can I ask a question to Pete? We list the grants in either the offering statement or the annual report. Is that correct? All open grants, regardless of whether there's an appropriation?
This conversation, I'm not following at all. Can somebody tell me what the issue is you're trying to solve? An open grant is a project that's open. When the project's over, the department closes it out. What are you trying to resolve?
If we receive the revenue that we expected from the grant, that the department followed through on the processes, asking for reimbursement, if we confirm that we received the money.
That's a different issue. That
Okay,
has nothing to do with open grants. Okay? Let's say that you appropriate $112 million for Central Middle School, which will take you many years to complete. It'll remain open until the project is fully constructed. There'll be retainage, and then it will require a state audit, usually a tabletop audit, to close the project out, notwithstanding the fact that the building department has a C&O. I'm not following the linkage between the grants and
I think what Leslie is saying, say you've got $1 million project, and there's $200,000 worth of grants, they finish the project, they close it out, it doesn't show up on our open capital anymore because they closed it, but we don't know, did they get the grants that we thought we were gonna get?
Okay, but that's a different
Yeah.
issue.
And I think it's like a separate process that maybe has to go.
Yeah.
We just need a process because that balances out, you know, what our expectations in terms of putting it into the capital model. You
Right.
know, these numbers, I mean, you know, again, I go back, you know, I will say when I was, you know, to, the example was the Round Hill Firehouse, when we went to approve the bonding resolution, and it was for the full amount of the appropriation, and yet we expected in a very substantial state grant, which hadn't yet been received. And so Leslie asked the question, but do we have to then approve the full bonding resolution? And the response from Peter Rowland was yes. So, but as far as we know, we're still going to get that full grant, a substantial grant. And so we need to do, in my opinion, a better job of managing that in to our debt model and the timing. We can't just say, oh, we're gonna wait forever, because, you know, we're still now collecting in bridge grant reimbursements from 2004. That's 20 years ago, David.
No.
And so,
I'm sitting with you, I'm gonna answer Pete's question, I think, and I'm with you. Basically, what Leslie's saying, if I could, Leslie Tarkington, is this projection that we have, which I'm ad nauseum referring to, showing that we violate the law, the statute in fiscal year 30, is insufficient because it may or may not accurately reflect grant money coming in, and/or it may include capital that is never going to be needed, open capital items that will never be needed. I think what Leslie Tarkington is saying is we have a slew of open capital projects, and the number keeps growing, and some of it may never be funded. And until we address that, the data that's in this model is not reliable, basically.
well, it could be improved, let's just put.
Or it could be improved. It
Why
could
don't
be
we be
improved.
positive?
And it could be improved. And I acknowledge the point. I'm saying, okay, the data needs to reflect the likely, you know, recipient, the level of grant money and the closeout of open capital. That's the issue, Pete. You're looking at me again like I'm from Mars.
I'm not following. Go ahead.
Why aren't you following?
Hamilton Avenue, Glenville, these are all open grants. What is the problem you're trying to solve?
Do you include them
It's
in
really
the?
a lot of the DPW grants for bridges, et cetera. Is there a system to know what, because we spend the money more quickly, a lot of those were reimbursement grants. Now some of the model has changed. I know the model includes an assumption for reimbursements. The question is the basis for that. Number one, the basis in the model, but then there's also the secondary question of just cash. Are we really getting what we expected to get? Or is there not a system to catch that, oh yeah, we forgot to pursue that?
Are there any Z-Fund projects in the model? No.
None in the Z fund.
So the bridges are Z-Fund projects. You're tying them to grants and you're talking about the model, which is confusing me.
So even the reimbursement bridge projects are not included in the capital appropriations?
The bonded
They're
ones
there.
are, not the Z-Fund. In the case of the bridges, if they're paid for with cash. Their revenues come into the general fund.
But I guess the point is still, if we're gonna get 90% reimbursement in the Z fund, did we get that 90%? That's
But what does that have to do with the 15-year model?
So there are two questions being raised. One, are we collecting the cash?
I think you're
So that's what you
conflating
guys-
two
Well,
problems here.
I think they're two separate problems. They may be some overlap, but are we collecting the cash? One basic question, which
We're
need to-
deficient in the area of grants collection. We haven't quantified how much we didn't apply for or missed, and to both your point, because you both met with the Public Works, they're going backwards to 20 years where they're looking for grants that weren't applied for, weren't received, which was probably prompted by the ongoing audit.
Will the
Okay.
audit catch, be able to identify all of those outstanding projects? I don't
That's
know
the
if that's
plan,
scope, that is-
that's the plan. We need to fill the position that Adam left and Agnes left and Angela left. And we need a more collaborative effort between finance and public works as far as the grant reimbursement. Okay. Where I'm getting confused is the model. Why are you plural, talking about a problem, which is grant application and receipt? And you're, in the same conversation, you're talking about open capital in the CIP plan.
Well, the model does have a line for reimbursements, which
No.
does try to tie
That-
projects that are included in the model and what money
Correct.
we're gonna get back.
And that is a Board of Education issue where predominantly the bulk of them grants are coming back through school construction reimbursements.
somewhere, but there's also a portion from other departments, isn't that right? Not just school reimbursement grants.
If they're bonded.
Well, even if it's a Z fund, did we get our $200,000 on our $1 million project?
You have them as grant receipts in the model?
It shows, because it reduces basically increases the tax.
The cash available for
Cash
cash
available.
projects. So. the
See, that's why this is a good discussion, because I think there is a need for clarity on this. The point's been made by Leslie Tarkington, which I think is right. I'm not arguing with her, and that is that until we know how realistic the open capital is, in other words, how much of that will never be funded, can we rely on this model? That's really the point. How do we do our capital planning if we don't have a handle on the open capital, which is growing, with an understanding as to what will never be funded and, what will indeed be funded? That's the point.
Well, and then, can I just add
Am I right?
something? Well, I was just gonna add to it, or because we do our bonding resolutions for the complete appropriation. So, I'm going back to the Round Hill Firehouse, and I don't remember exactly what that particular grant was, but I think it was like $500,000 on the project. The question is, are we then including all of this debt in our model when really we could be reducing it by
Right.
by the grant that's gonna come in on the front
I
end
fo-
and totally different. It's the way we appropriate and the way we manage these things. And all we're trying
I'm following
to
you.
do is trying to improve
Right.
the model.
I'm following you, but what troubles me is that Pete and Roland are not following you or me. So we have a gap here that I think you're saying you don't get what we're saying.
If you're talking about the 15-year model,
Yes.
does it have problems? Yes, it does. I can't tell you what degree, but I can give you examples. Is the timing, okay? 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, you had Central Middle School way out in the model, okay? Now what happens is you had an emergency, the
No,
building...
but Pete, sorry to interrupt, but stay on the issue that Leslie has been raising, on the open capital. Does that create a problem for the model?
I don't know what that means, open capital.
That's why I think we need
The
to.
the model assumes that that the full appropriations that the BET has authorized is spent over some period of time.
I was gonna get to
think
that.
it's over 3 or 4 years.
I was going
It's
to get to
not
that.
immediate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's part of the problems, okay? For example, there's timing, okay? The model can become flawed because of the timing, and I gave the example of Central Middle School, okay? And there's a lot of doing this and that because of emergencies. I'll give you another example, dredging. Remember the dredging problem issue down here where we put in the model $2 million, we appropriated $2 million. Years ago, I went to a department and said about how much you're gonna spend in the next year. I borrowed $500,000, okay? It was banned, and it's been bonded, and the project still hasn't started. That's an issue. And that's an issue that impacts the model. It's clear that we can't make the assumption that if we bond $50 million in year one, it will never be spent, in most cases. The opposite can happen where you have cost overruns on large projects. Hamilton Avenue was the classic going back years. I don't know how you could avoid that because you don't know what's going to happen going forward with large capital projects, okay? Delayed, inflation, not fully spent versus overspent. Look at the other towns and cities in the state of Connecticut. Stanford, for example, has I think it's West Hill High School, whatever it is. Huge problem. I've went online, I've looked at some of the finance board meetings. I mean, they're so far over budget on a single project. 15 years CIP modeling is hard to do accurately, okay?
No, but even 5 years, so.
So to your questions to us is, how do you solve that? I don't know. I don't know how you can make the assumptions accurate. To your point, Leslie, is let's assume that we're not going to spend 100% of all appropriations. Do we come up with a factor of 80%, 75%, 90% and put it in the model?
Yeah, I think,
Probably so.
I mean, there are some assumptions we can do. I mean, the model itself
Yeah.
is never gonna be a perfect forecast, right? That's just the essence of modeling. You need to put something out there, your best effort, your best guess, and then you look at the ranges of sensitivity on it. If we're off on this particular assumption, higher or lower, what does that do? But our model at this point probably doesn't give us enough information, or we don't know from the departments enough information, which we, as a town government, can probably try to get more accurate as far as the open capital
But
grants.
to David's point, forgive me, Leslie, just trying to answer the questions. If you spend a lot of time, and you is always plural, it could be Democrat, Republican combined, you spend a lot of time doing modeling, and it tells you you have a problem at a certain point, you need to do something about it, okay? What do you do about it? You pull back on borrowing. You borrow less, okay? But then that might create another problem where you're deferring infrastructure.
No, but, so Pete, what drives this discussion is what's been published by the finance department and distributed in the books to the public.
The budget book.
The budget books. And what drives this discussion is that in the fiscal year 30, we violate the statute. It's just in your book. Leslie Tarkenton makes a valid point that, wait a second, how good is this model if we're not really adjusting for open capital grants and so forth? Is it really reflecting the most likely case of what we're going to, over the next 5 years? So nobody can be precise. It's a model, even 5 years, and we're not trying to be precise. And so I think that each year we punt another year on this, and each year we don't further the discussion. We don't get any, because we're still at this impasse. The model is challenged because does it include open capital? Does it include grants? How is it? And we're struggling, and there's no movement, there's no progress. If the model is right, then there are limited tools. You really can't reduce your spending because it's baked into what's been already appropriated, I think. Then you get into the things with, and that's why we get into the guidelines. Is the capital tax levy sufficient to alleviate this problem? We can't violate the law in fiscal year 30. And that's what haunts this discussion. So if you're saying that, wait a second, all the open capital is really mostly a discussion of timing and not of actual number, or if you're saying that the open capital or grant issues do not really affect the conclusion of the model, that's one thing. but I'm not sure that that's understood. That's why we're having the discussion. You with me?
Yeah. You know, one of the other ways of resolving that, the problem you keep referring to in year 30 is you raise taxes.
Well, right, that's what the guidelines are for. So you'd have to,
I mean, common sense is if you're gonna spend 112 million plus overruns, which will probably happen for one school, and then $45 million or whatever the number is for what other schools, historically, we've never had these projects that size.
correct.
Historically, we're talking about projects, whether it's Project Renew, Hamilton Avenue, Glenville, in the 20s, okay? The numbers had exploded. You've got 112, which will probably go up. You've got 40-something, which I can't tell where that's gonna go. And then you've got another bunch of schools behind it, and then you don't know what else is out there, okay? Common sense is that you have to raise taxes to pay for that debt service.
Right,
Or change the debt service.
Okay, that's a.
For one project. One
Okay,
project,
that's
though.
why I was trying to not get into that area. And, I mean, and also, and I've done this modeling in other towns, is you've got to also look at operating problems. You've got payroll inflation, you've got utility inflation.
Yep.
These are bigger problems over 5, 10, 15 years. I shouldn't say they're problems, it's the cost of doing business. You know, everybody's got these issues. Payroll is constantly gonna go up. Okay, if you don't reduce payroll, you're stuck with the same head count, and you can project what it's gonna be if you're gonna do 2.5, 2.5, 2.75, whatever it is.
but,
They're compounding the problem, and they're not even in the CIP, the 15-year CIP, as far as modeling.
right.
Operating expense.
By the way,
Operating.
do we include the $22 million reimbursement in the model for Central Middle School?
Yes.
Yes.
We do.
The 22 or this 8 that they had projected? I'm not sure
The
it's
22 is new now,
Right, the
Yeah,
22
so-
so it's a reduction.
So that will be a reduction.
yeah.
And that's a tailwind, that's helpful. Are you saying that the open capital issue is not a driver of this model, and that the open capital or grant issue is, not going to affect the essence of what's in this model? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but, because that's what we've been struggling with. Are you saying that,
Can someone define clearly for me, because I'm not getting it, what is the open capital issue?
so let me
you're
try,
talking about?
because what open capital means, you publish a list of all the open capital that's been appropriated but not yet funded. We get a list, and I don't know what the number
But
is.
you have to spend. You have to spend that money. 'Cause
Correct.
You've appropriated, you've committed it.
Yes, yes. Now,
So why is that a problem?
no, the problem is, to what extent are we actually, some of those funds, some of those appropriations go back a number of years, and I think Leslie Tarkington is saying, fairly, in my opinion, maybe some of them will never really get spent. I think that's your point, right? Maybe they'll never get spent.
Or the spent over, it levels out your numbers because they're spent more slowly.
Correct.
I mean, there's multiple.
That's her point, and I don't have an answer. I'm receptive to the point, that, in the spirit of trying to get this thing to work.
The majority of them projects will not be spent at 100%. But, let's say that Central Middle School all of a sudden costs you $150 million. It wipes out all of them underspendings, and little $50,000, $250,000, $500,000, $1 million projects. How do you factor that in? How do you factor in if Old Greenwich and if the two that are on the table and the next two overspend by $100 million? It might be far-fetched, but it's potential that.
So your experience.
So how do you predict the future?
So let me spin it back. Then you're saying, as a matter of conservative budgeting, yes, it's true, some of that open capital will not be spent or be elongated. But it's also true that some of the appropriations will face overruns, and that in your experience, the two offset, or as a conservative budgeting principle, we have to assume that in order not to be too liberal in how we budget our capital needs. Am I reflecting what you're saying?
Yeah, let me use another example. Let me pick on the rink. If you went out 5 years ago, backwards, okay? The rink was in the model. Was the number the same for each of the 5 years you did a CIP? What did it start out at?
I think it was around 12, and then it was 17, wasn't it? Something like that.
Okay, that's where, in my mind, I don't want to use the word flaw, because it's great work what you all do, you know, as far as modeling. You're making honest attempts of getting assumptions. But the large projects, well, how about Mesa? What did Mesa start out at?
Yeah.
17? 12, we started out at 12, I mean,
No,
first
the
number I
12
heard was
the
12,
12
but it started at
is a
17, I think.
fabrication.
Okay,
17,
go
29.
back 20 years. I mean, not 20, go back 15 years. And another thing is, let's go back to 2011 with soil remediation. The year before
Yeah.
soil remediation hit, nobody had it on anybody's radar.
Right.
How much have we spent on soil remediation in the since 2011? We know, because this poor guy is getting beat over the head every year with accurate figures from the auditors, and where we have to project, you know, accurately and put in footnote number 8, how much, what's the liability that's out there. These are all large projects that affect the model, okay? When you start out, when you start out, when soil remediation didn't exist, I had no idea how big it was gonna be. Mesa, Hamilton Avenue School with the overruns. Glenville was the opposite. It was one of the greatest runs, projects. It came in under budget on time, so like.
So this is the reason why Pete Minarski is an irreplaceable asset for the town of Greenwich.
No,
No,
but
you-
you have to start somewhere, right? And we
No,
keep
no.
improving.
Modeling is great.
Right.
Modeling is great, but
So you gotta make decisions based on the information you
Yeah.
have in front of you, understanding.
yeah, you don't wanna work in a
Positive and
vacuum or in the
negative.
dark, or, you know,
Exactly.
something like that. You've gotta make an honest attempt to be accurate. But so many things impact the model.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they seem to always negatively impact the model.
I mean, the biggest challenge we have right now is that we have two very large projects simultaneous. The biggest thing in terms of us being able to pay back the debt obligation, right? They're happening simultaneously. The other large projects we see coming down the pike in the model, they're spaced out a little bit. We have the rink, and then Riverside School's the next one up. But they're several years apart or down the road. But the challenge of paying for both Central and Old Greenwich simultaneously is what's stressing this model. Over time, that capital tax levy, even at a modest rate, goes up. It gives more capacity. We don't know what we don't
You know,
know in here.
and I'll bring up another factor in trying to predict modeling accurately. If you go back to 2010 when we started this, we did the public safety had 3 phases. There was the police, there was the fire, and then there was the GEMS, okay, kind of thing. Who would have known for the next 10 to 15 years interest rates would be so low, okay? Incredibly low. I mean, we had bands at 10 basis points, you know, and less than 50 basis points
Right.
for general obligation debt kind of thing. So can any of the 4 of you tell me what the interest rates are gonna be for the next 2, 5, 7 years?
No,
But you gotta put a number in.
yes,
Okay, so you're making your best effort.
right.
And even Bill Lindsay, he won't commit. He won't commit past the next 2 months or something, you know, and ask for a number to put into the model, okay? Because he has no idea. It would be a pure guess. So I'm sorry that I can't answer the question about the open capital project problem. Maybe you can answer it.
Well, if no other reason than just the administrative work, especially that you have to do, open, authorize and unissued, authorize and unissued,
Yeah.
we have to work that, if we could cut that in half, that would be,
Right, so basically you're saying that it's not a good use of time. But
What,
basically,
modeling?
no. Coming to get a more precise number on all the open capital for all the individual projects is not necessarily the best use of time, because in your experience, yes, there may be an inflated number in there in aggregate, but it tends to be offset by overruns on the other side, and that from a planning purpose, it may not be the most fruitful use of time. I think that's what I'm hearing. No? I don't want to put word, that's what you're saying.
But nevertheless, I mean, we have something like, I mean, these dates are from September 30th, you know. But, 372 town of Greenwich, the big town,
Yeah.
including board, projects, and that totaled $320 million.
That's
So,
right.
these are, and, when we break it up,
But 150
Well,
million of that is our building committee projects.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick on Central Middle School, you all, I mean, this is reopening old wounds, but do you remember when we were trying to figure out how much to appropriate for Central Middle School? When it was up in the 90s?
Yes.
Then it went down into the 60s?
Yes.
Okay, what is it now?
112.
Yeah, and what could it potentially be?
Oh, I don't,
It's not gonna be less than 112.
no.
I mean, that's part of modeling.
Right.
And that's your all-time biggest capital project.
Right.
And you've got a lineup, a couple more coming right behind it.
So this is a great discussion, and it's just great to have. If I take this discussion up a level, I say, we would all agree, I think, I would agree, that we need to manage the town so that we have a predictable, moderate, reasonable level of mill rate over time. That the citizens of Greenwich can expect predictable increases, and they're gonna have to be increases because of inflation, we could debate that, but it needs to be predictable and moderate. There's no debate, I think, among anybody on the BET. The problem is, we have headwinds because we've appropriated 112 million for Central, we've appropriated 40-some million for Old Greenwich. They're all gonna hit us, both gonna hit us quickly, and it puts a strain on there's a bulge in the capital plan. That's a headwind. We have another headwind with Nathaniel Witherall. We could all agree that the deficits in Witherall are egregious and costly, and have been for a decade. There's no debate. Those are the numbers. The question, though, we have failed as a community to have a strategic plan to privatize, sell, or otherwise relinquish the asset. And so those deficits have plagued us, and in all likelihood, as a budgeting comment, will continue to plague us going forward. The notion that we're going to run Witherall at break even is wishful thinking and happy talk. I'd love it if that's the case, but we can't force that to occur. We have to plan for the worst and push to get it to be better. So we have two big headwinds. The capital plan, we have Witherall.
So I'm gonna break in on Witherall, because Witherall was to the point of almost getting to break even when it took on Project Renew. And the Project Renew was to basically add the rehab business, to basically make sure that we weren't having any losses on the long-term care business. It was the long-term care business that was significant and important to the town residents. And that's really, it's kind of a general statement, but it's really what, their, whatever it is, community council, whatever it is, at Witherall is concerned about. Now, we sort of bifurcated it, and we're going off in this tangent to, create, we know that the rehab business is also losing money, just the way the long-term care is. So the question is, how do we bring that back to maybe just, doing the long-term care, whatever, making sure that it's more of a town facility rather than regional. I mean, quite frankly, and this is where, I feel pretty strongly once again, I believe we should have very proactive liaisons in that this work should be done, not by the budget committee, you know, but really out there and really handling it. And I couldn't be more disappointed that it's month after month after month that they haven't returned to the budget committee, okay? And which was our expectation and what we agreed upon and what they agreed on. And so, you know, and there is no strategic plan as I can see it for Witherall at this point in time, which is what I think you're talking about.
Right.
What?
Harry has one.
So, you know, I just, you know,
Harry has it.
I know, I'm gonna get to Harry.
Oh, okay.
Harry?
I want to dispute something Mr. Weisbrot said. It's not happy talk when it's a private sector exists in the nursing homes exist in the private sector without government subsidies. So let's not,
No,
let's not, I'm not finished, let's not call it happy talk. Just,
no, you misunderstood.
it's not happy talk.
No, Harry, I'm
Can we
glad.
be careful with that?
What?
Can we be careful with that?
No, I'll be careful. I'm glad you said that, Harry, because I don't mean that. What I meant to say is, it's happy talk to wish away these deficits from a budgeting process. Yes, there are strategical options that are not happy talk, that are viable, but they haven't borne fruit. The strategic options to go into the private sector and all, that's what I meant.
Telling them that they're going to have an extra $3 million is not,
No.
is not going to solve the problem.
No.
But I want to talk about something else, just for historical perspective. Yes, Central Middle School and Old Greenwich are huge projects, but for historical perspective, if you adjust it to current dollars, the high school was far larger when it was built in the late 60s, and the sewer plant was far larger when it was built and expanded. And probably the renovation and expansion of the high school in the 90s was far larger. We didn't bond until we decided to buy the Pomerantz-Duckman property in Costco. It used to be that all of these humongous capital projects were completed with current tax dollars.
So what's the point? I mean, you can tax it, fine, but then we have to tax it.
Yeah, but you're advocating taxing ahead of time, and I'm just not.
No, I'm not, I just want to be clear, I'm not advocating any of that. I'm just saying we're the budget committee, and we have to look squarely at what's hitting us. Les Tarkenton's right. The liaisons with Nathaniel Witherall need to step up and do their work and so on. I don't disagree with a word of that. Should we have strategic plans to privatize? Absolutely. Let's think of everything we can do. All I'm saying is, as a budget committee, we have to conservatively confront what we're faced with and then manage that accordingly. And it's no easy task. So let me just make the point even more clearly. In the event that, God forbid, we have another $3 million deficit at Nathaniel Witherall, and we have to put more money into the capital tax levy, it will bring our mill rate above the level that any of us are comfortable with. But we have to plan for that and then see, okay, what other efficiencies can we achieve, or how do we manage that? But to not confront these headwinds is failure to do our job as a budget committee. That's all I'm saying.
And so this is where I disagree.
Okay.
It's failure on other people's part not to do their
That
job.
may be too.
And then we have to finance it, okay? I mean, I do think that there should be a strategic plan for Nathaniel Witherall. I don't think it's necessarily the BET liaisons that do that. It's, the board, more strategically, and I suppose the first selectman's office.
Right.
And, I do agree that those things need to be done, and, I think I have been patient too long, you've been patient too long. These things need to be accomplished, but they don't necessarily, what I have seen again and again is more and more of the town's work coming back to the budget committee and more pressures on us. And I believe that we need to have major pushback onto some of these other organizations, and be it, I see you, Leslie, some of it, you know, within our own BET structure, but, you know, elsewhere. Leslie?
So I want to get back to what the guidelines need to accomplish, and how I see the budget committee should be looking at the financial obligations that we've got. I don't think we can wish away what's looking at us. I think there are negative implications to a lot of the policies that we talked about, or I should say alternative implications. Harry, you mentioned in the 90s when we built the high school, we did it on cash.
60s and 70s.
Well, 60s when we built it, 90s
90s
when
when
we
we
ended the
renovated.
Science Center and renovated. During that period of time in the 90s, the Board of Ed was starved of any other capital, which is why maintenance went down, and we ended up having to rebuild Hamilton Avenue
Right.
School. So I think there are impacts for delays. One, both the facilities worsen, but second, things also get more expensive, so you don't necessarily save anything at the end of the day by pushing things down the road. Kicking the can down the road has been talked about before. So we have to be realistic about where we are, what kind of community we live in now, the cost of doing business, and how we're going to fund that. Nathaniel Witherell is a long-term issue, right? We've seen it took 3-4 years for all of the analysis to get done, to talk about alternatives. We're a year and a half down the road and we're still where we are. We have to plan for the financial cost. When we say we're going to put in $500,000 in here, which I think is your way of messaging to Nathaniel Witherell, you're not going to get more money. But then we're funding $5 million after the fact because that's what they need to balance up their fund this year. We're not properly planning, right? We are waiting until the loss happens, and then we're going to balance, we're going to tax for it, we're going to try to fund it in some other manner. That, to me, is not good financial planning. Maybe the answer's somewhere in the middle, but realistically, do you think in fiscal '26, the 500,000 is what they're going to have, not before debt service and capital, which is what the break-even level is we're talking about, but after debt service and after capital? I have a hard time believing that that's going to happen.
Now, you're changing a practice that we've had for a number of years of, funding their losses in the subsequent year. So you're compounding 5 million and 3 million together to increase the taxes on the residents. So,
But that
let's have a
only changed-
discussion about changing what has been a practice.
It's been a practice for only 3 years. It was $3 million up until about of their annual amount until 3-4 years ago when someone said, okay, we've got to send the signal when we're not willing to fund at that level anymore. But that's not, clearly, we've got 4 years of experience that hasn't occurred.
And I was on the BET in the 90s. I don't remember school capital being constrained. Hamilton Avenue needed to be renovated and expanded. So I don't think that was a result of any constraints by the BET.
Back then, capital and operating were budgeted together, so you were pitting operating expenses against capital at that time.
So I just want to come back to Witherell, because what it seems to me is you just keep wanting to spend more and more money on Witherell, doesn't have a plan, and we're just funding their losses. I mean, is there a way to stop, to just basically halt spending per month, in our books, so that, rather than just building without any, stops here? That, I think we need to start thinking about some of these things and talk, with Roland P., with Witherell itself, but, just to let them lose as much money as they want to lose every year, and then we fund it after the fact. I mean, I also consider that to be unconscionable, where in business would you ever allow that, David? I mean, we're both private sector people. I mean, to me, and I was on the Witherell board, and that was why we did Project Renew, and we got it to the point where it's almost, break even. But, even at that point, we were covering more expenses in the revenue fund. First, and they wanted a revenue fund. They wanted to be able to do this, and that was going to help them with their audits. Then, all the expenses that they had were then like, oh, we don't want to take care of these expenses, including the largest user of the purchasing department, the largest user of the law department, the largest user of the HR department, the town side of it. There are second largest departments, second only to the Board of Education, which may or may not consider itself a department, but that's, So I do think that, it's time to get pretty firm, and we're going to have that opportunity hopefully in November when they're going to come to us. But I just think that this endless funding of losses, I mean, again, it's what, $35,000 per bed per year, or whatever it is, something in that range, higher, I guess, maybe. It needs to be rethought, but I don't think that that's necessarily a reason for us to adjust the way we budget, but to move things. I think it's time to move on
I want to
and
move
close
on
this out.
too. Could we just, what do we expect as a process from here to, completing the work that the
Well, I
BET
think
has the obligation
we said
to
we
do?
were going to get together with Roland and start talking through some of these numbers, getting a better idea. I think we'll also get some more updated numbers that will be more current over the next couple of weeks, hopefully.
But what's the timetable? Just
Well, I think
so
it's
we
probably
get it out
November at
there.
this point, don't you?
Well, we're not going to be able to take it up tonight, so.
I'm sorry?
We're not taking it up tonight at our BET meeting, so.
It's on the agenda, but it seems like we're very far apart. And I, for one, think that setting higher targets on the 200s, 800s especially, and other places is just not the way to set guidelines as an objective, that if we put 3% instead of 2.75, then we're going to get 3%. And I don't want 3%.
Right.
So I think we can wrap this up now and, work offline. We'll all be talking with each other independently, not as four people as such. And we're all very conscious of how we handle this. I think we're communicating with each other.
Yeah, no, thank you, Leslie, talking to. I think messy as it is, and it is messy, it's useful to just air all these issues as we have just done. I think it's useful, and I think it's necessary. And I don't know that I just want to say, Harry, I wouldn't call those targets. See, this is where we need to spend more time talking together. They're not targets. We're not targeting 3 million more at Witherall or targeting increases. It's not about targets. We all have a common goal of keeping the mill rate to grow at a moderate, predictable, reasonable rate. And so we want to reduce the expenditures, whether you be Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. They're not targets. But at the same time, we have to be realistic. If a contract was signed with the labor unions at 3%, putting in a number that's less than that.
Wait, whoa, I'm sorry, you're conflating the 100s and the 2 to 800s.
No,
The contract increases are in the 100s.
no, I'm talking about the 100s. I meant the 100s.
We have a 3% target
Okay.
on the 100s.
No, not target, but I wouldn't use that word. That's the expected increase.
And we're all in agreement.
We're all
all
in agreement on the
We're all
100s.
in agreement,
Okay,
but it also includes
I'm
things like
talking the 2 to
consulting.
800s.
Okay, fair enough. And then that's a point. You make a good point. That's a point.
You put it at 3%, you're going to get 3%.
That's, well, I don't know if
It's true.
so
It's a fact of life.
Harry.
Okay, so I think we've all had an opportunity to talk. I think it's been a good session.
Good
We've spent
session.
about an hour on this topic. And so what I'd like to do now is just move to the second item that was on our agenda, which was the approval of the BET Budget Committee meeting minutes for July 9th, 2024. Do I have a motion?
I'll
to
make the
approve?
motion to approve the July 9th minutes.
Second.
So moved by Leslie Moriarty, seconded by Harry Fisher. Those in favor?
Aye.
So
Aye.
that's 4-0.
There you go. 4-0-0. Well
Right,
done.
unanimous. Okay, so is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
So
Second.
Leslie Moriarty has made a motion to adjourn, seconded by Harry Fisher. This is at 10:20.
10:18, according to my phone.